Processes are the backbone of any reliable operation. And in this video, we're going to break down why they matter so much. When work flows in a clear, repeatable sequence, you get consistency, fewer mistakes, faster flow, and a foundation that you can even improve on. Processes turn good intentions into predictable results. This makes training easier, exposes waste, and gives teams the stability they need to grow. If you want better quality, smoother workflow, and a system that doesn't fall apart when people change or pressure rises, it all starts with a solid process. First, let's define what a process is. A process is simply a series of work activities that take inputs, performs work on them, and has an output that is different in either form, function, or value. Since processes are so critical, it's very important that they are well documented. I want to take a few moments and share with you the steps I use to document a process. It starts by defining what the purpose of the process is. I always ask, why does this process exist? What is the reason we need to have it? What problem does this process solve? Is another good question. Finally, define what success looks like. To sum this up, start with the end in mind. For example, if we are using bearings that are critical to our final product, we may have a workstation set up to ensure the bearings are correct. Once we know the purpose, we have to identify the boundaries of the process. Determine the trigger that tells us to start the process. This is our start point. In the case of our bearings, it can be the arrival of a new container of product. Now we have to identify the end point of the process. At what point will the purpose of the process be completed? Now we must determine what to include and exclude from the process. In our example, the process starts when the materials arrive at the test station. Of course, the process ends when the inspection is completed. Since our purpose was a consistent inspection, we should have a good part or a bad part. Now we need to identify the roles that are in the process. First, we identify who will perform the tasks in the process. We also need to know who has approval of the process. Finally, we have to identify who receives the output from the process. This is the customer or the next process. Taking time to do this will improve communication, make handoffs clear, and reduce confusion. The next step is gathering the inputs. Remember, inputs are anything that is required before the process begins, although some inputs may occur later in the process. Inputs are things like raw materials, tools and equipment, information, standards, or permissions. Next, we map the steps of the process in order. This is the key to documenting the process. Identifying the sequence of the steps is critical to creating a stable and repeatable process. The best way to do this is involving the people who are doing the work. Once identified, document the steps in work instructions. This can be used for training. When documenting steps, keep the following items in mind. Start the step with an action verb. Action should be observable or measurable. Remember, we are describing what should be done. If they're needed, we now have to incorporate decision points and any variation. Define if-then paths. For example, if a bearing fails the inspection test, it has to be placed in a defect container. We also have to consider exceptions that may occur. Perhaps we have different part types that require different measurements. Be careful with this, though. If we have too many variations, we may need separate processes. Processes may have special cases, but like variations, this can become too complex and may require separate processes. We also need to consider rework loops. When mapping the process, a flowchart really shines. Of course, the whole purpose of any process is to generate outputs. These are the things that we pass on to our customer or the next process. It is possible for a process to have more than one output. For example, a rejected part might be one output, while an accepted part is another. Outputs should always tie back to the purpose of the processes. This is why it is important to understand the purpose. Outputs can be many different things. Here are a few examples. A completed form, an approved part, a rejected part, an updated record. There are many others. These are just a few examples. Because processes really should be measurable, we have to define criteria, tolerances, and standards. These things are actually inputs, but let's take a look at a few examples of them.
Specifications. These can be customer defined or internal. Quality criteria are the specific, measurable standards that define what good looks like for a product, process, or service. Safety rules that must be followed to maintain a safe work environment. Timing and deadlines for completion. Acceptance and rejection standards may also be required.
Once a process is clearly defined and documented, we need to validate it.
Testing the process documentation with multiple levels helps confirm how well it works, or doesn't. A subject matter expert can assure the accuracy of the details in the process. A new employee can help confirm if the process is clear. Find someone in the organization who can verify that the documentation is clear, but also that it conforms to organizational standards.
Now that we know the process works and is well documented, we have to format it for the best use. This may include
one-page reference sheets, flowcharts, checklists, work instructions or standard operating procedures, visual aids, or many other items. There are many factors that may cause a process to change over time. Continuous improvement, customer demands, and shifting business strategies are just a few examples. As this happens, we need to review and update our documentation. Because of this, we must control the documentation. This ensures we are always using the latest versions. Here are some key aspects to a controlled document. A revision date tells us when the last change was made. A version number helps us to do the same. The owner of the process is also identified. This is the position who has the final approval of any changes to this process. A history of the changes should also be documented. This gives you the reason that the change was made and a summary of what the change actually was.
A well-documented process doesn't just keep work organized. It creates the consistency, the clarity, and the stability that every operation depends on.
By understanding the purpose, setting boundaries, identifying roles, mapping steps, and validating the workflow,
we turn everyday tasks into reliable, repeatable systems that support both quality and growth. When we document a process clearly and format it for real-world use, we give teams the tools they need to work smarter, train faster, and deliver better results every time. Thanks for watching this video. If you found it useful or even interesting, please make a comment below. Or click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any future videos.